So, explain the identification, classification, and health effects of hazardous substances used in the workplace. 2.0. The influence of physical form and properties on routes of entry. The physical form. Physical forms of hazardous substances include dust, fibers, fumes, gases, mists, vapors, and liquids. The physical form of a hazardous substance can affect how it enters the body and, to some extent, the damage it causes. For example, a gas may easily enter the body by inhalation, whereas a liquid is more likely to be absorbed through the skin. The fact that hazardous substances may change their state during work process that involve changes in temperature and pressure makes it important to make all possible states of a chemical into account. Solids, firm and stable in shape, not a liquid or fluid, generally more harmful to health when finely divided and airborne. For example, solid hardwood is not harmful as a block of wood, but is harmful as a dust. Dusts, small solid particles up to 150 microns in diameter, created by activities such as grinding, grit blasting, sweeping, mixing cement, which become airborne. Size is important as the smaller dust particles can penetrate deep into the lungs. Fibers, asbestos, and man-made fibers (MMF), have different characteristics to dust particles. Key dimensions that affect a fiber's ability to penetrate into the lungs are the length and the diameter of the fiber and the length to diameter ratio. Fumes, fine solid particles less than 1 micron in size. They are created by condensation from a vapor such as in welding. Gases, a formless chemical which occupies the space within which it is enclosed, such as carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide. Mists, small liquid droplets suspended in the air, for example oil mist and paint spraying. Vapors, the gaseous form of a liquid or a solid at normal temperature and pressure, such as solvent vapors given off by chloroform. Liquids, a free-flowing fluid such as water at normal temperature. Main routes of entry are ingestion and skin absorption. Properties of substances. Knowledge of physical properties of a chemical can give an indication of nature or extent of potential health effects given certain environmental conditions. Those properties include boiling point. Some liquids can give off gases and vapors even when below boiling point, thus making inhalation easier. The lower the boiling point of a liquid, the more vapors it will emit at ambient temperature. Vapor pressure. High vapor pressure usually means more vapor will be given off even at ambient temperatures, thus posing an inhalation threat. Evaporation rate. The rate at which a liquid evaporates, that is, changes to gas, also called volatility. Highly volatile liquids are a greater risk in terms of potential inhalation of vapors as they evaporate more quickly. Solubility. How soluble a substance will be in water, for example chlorine and ammonia gases, are readily soluble in water and therefore if inhaled can react with the mucus on the respiratory system and cause a severe corrosive action and pulmonary edema, fluid buildup in the lungs. 2.1. The distinction between inhalable and respirable dust. Total inhalable dust. Total inhalable dust is a fraction of airborne materials which enters the nose and mouth during breathing and is therefore liable to deposition anywhere in the respiratory tract. The particle sizes of total inhalable dust are up to 100 microns. Respirable dust. Respiral dust is that fraction that penetrates to the deep lung where gas exchange takes place. The particle sizes of respirable dust are between 4 and 10 microns. Any smaller than that, the particles show random movement and waft in and out of the alveoli, much like a gas. These values are affected by respiration, and hygroscopicity. The more water soluble the particle, the more likely it will dissolve higher in airways before it reaches the deep lung. The Global Harmonized System Classification and Labeling of Chemicals (GHS) is an internationally agreed upon system created by the United Nations beginning in 1992. It was designed to replace the various classification and labeling standards used in different countries by using consistent criteria on global level. The aim of the system is to create a common chemical labeling process globally. European Regulation (EC) number 1272/2008 on classification, labeling and packaging of substances and mixtures came into force on the 20th January 2009 in all EU member states including the UK. It is known by the abbreviated form the CLP regulation or just plain CLP. The CLP regulation adopts the United Nations globally harmonized system on the classification and labeling of chemicals (GHS) across all European Union countries, including the UK. The GHS is the voluntary agreement rather than a law. It has to be adopted through a suitable national or regional legal mechanism to ensure it becomes legally binding. That's what the CLP regulation does. GHS and CLP provides a logical approach to defining health and physical and environmental hazards of chemicals, creating classification processes that use available data on chemicals for comparison with the defined hazard criteria, communicating hazards information as well as protective measures on labels and safety data sheets. Classification. The GHS classification system is a complex system aiming to classify substances according to the severity of the hazard they pose. For example, a toxic substance such could be classified into any one of five different toxicity classifications depending on how toxic it is. The hazardous classification process comprises three steps: identification of relevant data regarding the hazard of substance or mixture, subsequent review of those data to ascertain the hazard associated with the substance or mixture, and a decision on whether the substance or mixture will be classified as hazardous substance or mixture and the degree of hazard where appropriate by comparison of the data with agreed hazard classification criteria. Hazard statements. Hazard statements form part of the globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals (GHS). They are intended to form a set of standard phrases about the hazards of a chemical substance and mixtures that can be translated into different languages. As such, they serve the same purpose as the well-known R phrases, which they are intended to replace. Hazard statements. are one of the key elements for labeling of containers under the GHS, along with an identification of the product, one or more hazard pictograms where necessary, a signal word, either danger or warning where necessary, precautionary statements indicating how the product should be handled to minimize the risk to the users as well as to other people and the general environment, the identity of the supplier, who might be the manufacturer or importer. Each hazard statement is designated a code, starting with the letter H and followed by three digits. Statements which correspond to related hazards are grouped together by code number, so the numbering is not consecutive. The code is used for reference purposes, for example, to help with translations, but is the actual phrase which should appear on labels and safety data sheets. Example: health hazard statement include H300 fatal if swallowed, H302 harmful if swallowed, H310 fatal in contact with skin, H312 harmful in contact with skin, H314 causes severe skin burns and eye damage, H315 causes skin irritation, H317 may cause an allergic skin reaction, H318 causes serious eye damage, H320 cause eye irritation, H330 fatal if inhaled, H332 harmful if inhaled, H334 may cause allergy or asthma symptoms or breathing difficulties if inhaled, H335 may cause respiratory irritation, H340 may cause genetic defects, H350 may cause cancer, H360 may damage fertility or the unborn child, H370 causes damage to organs. Precautionary statement. Precautionary statements from part of the globally harmonized system and classification and labeling of chemicals GHS. They are intended to form a set of standardized phrases giving advice about the correct handling of chemical substances and mixtures, which can be translated into different languages. As such, they serve the same purpose as the well known S phrases, which they are intended to replace. Each precautionary statement is designated a code starting with the letter P and followed by three digits. Statements which correspond to related hazards are grouped together by code number, so the numbering is not consecutive. The code is used to reference purposes, for example, to help with translations, but it is the actual phrase which should appear on labels and safety data sheets. Some precautionary phrases are combinations indicated by a plus sign. In several cases, there is a choice of wording, for example, avoid breathing dust, fume, gas, mist, vapor, spray. The supplier or regulatory agency should choose the appropriate wording for the product concerned. Precautionary statements can either be general, preventative, response, or storage related. Examples include 3 P351. Rinse cautiously with water for several minutes. P52. Wash with plenty of water. P262. Do not get in eyes, on skin, or on clothing. P263. Avoid contact during pregnancy while nursing. P264. Wash thoroughly after handling. P270. Do not eat, drink, or smoke when using this product. P71. Use only outdoors or in well ventilated areas. 2.3 Health Hazard Classes. Classification of chemicals is a scientific assessment of whether it can cause harm, for example, whether it has the potential to cause cancer, explode, irritate the eyes, etc. Chemicals are classified so that people using them either in industry or as consumers can understand any hazardous effect they could have on human health or the environment and to protect against that harm. Classification is about identifying intrinsic hazards, not controlling risks. It's about getting the information needed for decisions about risk controls to be made so that the chemicals can be produced, transported, used, and disposed of safely. Classification of fundamental to safe chemical management. It is vital that classification is based on accurate, robust, and adequate data and information. Refers to the adverse effects occurring following oral or dermal administration of a single dose of substance or multiple doses given within 24 hours or an inhalation exposure of 4 hours. Skin corrosion is the production of irreversible damage to the skin, namely visible necrosis through the epidermis and into the dermis, following the application of a test substance for up to 4 hours. Corrosive reactions are typified by bleeding, ulcers, bloody scabs, and by the end of absorption at 14 days, by discoloration due to blanching of the skin, complete areas of alopecia, and scars. Skin irritation. A substance is a skin irritant when it produces reversible damage to the skin following its application up to 4 hours. Serious eye damage is the production of tissue damage in the eye or serious physical decay of vision, which is not fully reversible within 21 days of application of the test substance. Eye irritation is the production of changes in the eye following the application of test substance to the anterior surface of the eye, which are fully reversible within 21 days of application. Respiratory skin sensitization. A respiratory sensitizer is a substance that will lead to hypersensitivity of the airways following inhalation of the substance. A skin sensitizer is a substance that will lead to an allergic response following the skin contact. Germ cell mutagenicity. A germ cell mutagen is a substance that may cause mutations in the germ cells of humans that can be transmitted to the progeny offspring. A mutation is defined as a permanent change in the amount or structure of a genetic material in a cell. In a cell. Carcinogenicity. A carcinogen is a substance or mixture which includes cancer or increases its incidence. This may be due to the ability to damage the genome or the disruption of cellular metabolic processes. Reproductive toxicity. Reproductive toxicity is associated substances that will interfere in some way with normal reproduction. Such substances are called reprotoxic. It includes adverse effects on sexual function and fertility in adult males and females, as well as developmental toxicity in the offspring. Specific target organ toxicity. Classification identifies the chemical substance as being a specific target organ systematic toxici- toxicant, toxicant, and as such, it may present potential for adverse health impacts to people who are exposed to it. The effects may be after a single exposure, such as hydrofluoric acid, or after repeated exposure, such as asbestos. Aspiration hazard. Aspiration hazard means the entry of liquid and solid substances directly through the oral nasal cavity or indirectly through vomiting into the trachea and lower respiratory system. 2.4. The purpose of the European regulation, registration, evaluation, authorization, and restriction of chemical REACH. REACH is the European Union regulation concerning the registration, evaluation, authorization, and restriction of chemicals. It came into force on 1st June 2007 and replaced several European directives and regulations with a single system. REACH has several aims. The to provide a high of pro- to provide a high level of protection of human health and the environment from the use of chemicals, to make the people who place chemicals on the market manufacturers responsible for understanding and managing the risks associated with their use, to allow the free movement of substances on the EU market, to enhance innovation in and competitiveness of the EU chemical industry, to promote the use of alternative methods for assessment of the hazardous properties of substances, e.g., quantitative structure activity relationship QSAR, and read across. Registration. A major part of REACH is the requirement for manufacturers or importers of substances to register with them with a Central European Chemical Agency (ECHA). A registration package will be supported by a standard set of data on that substance. The amount of data required is proportionate to the amount of substance manufactured or supplied. The last REACH registration deadline will be on May 31st, May 2018. The deadline concerns companies that manufacture or import chemical substances in low volumes between 1 and 100 tons per year. If you do not register your substances, then the data on them will not be available, and as a result, you will no longer be able to manufacture or supply them legally. In example, no data, no market. Manufacturer duties. Since 1st December 2008, chemical substances manufactured in Europe in amounts of 1 ton or more per year have needed to be registered with the European Chemicals Agency in Helsinki. It is only it is only chemicals on their own that are registered, not deliberate mixtures of chemicals, formulations, or preparations. Where a chemical is supplied or used as part of a deliberate mixture, it is the individual ingredients that are registered. In some cases, substances in articles need to be registered. Manufacturers who want to continue to manufacture chemicals covered by REACH will need to register them with the European Chemical Agency in Helsinki. Registration means providing a package of technical information on the chemical and its hazards. Registration is phased over the period of years based on tonnage levels and, in some cases, the hazard of the chemical. However, to take advantage of the phase in time, chemicals need to be pre registered. Importer duties. Companies outside the EU cannot register chemicals themselves but can appoint a EU based agent, an only representative, to act on behalf their EU-based importers. Companies wishing to continue to import chemicals covered by REACH, you will need to register them with the ECHA. Registration means providing a package of technical information on the chemical and its hazards. Registration is phased over a period of years based on the tonnage levels and, in some cases, the hazards of the chemical. However, to take advantage of the phase in time, chemicals need to be pre registered. 2.5 Specific examples of hazardous substances: carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide CO, is a colorless, odorless, and tasteless gas that is slightly less dense than air. Carbon monoxide is absorbed through breathing and enters the bloodstream through gas exchange in the lungs to form carbon hemoglobin. When this happens, the blood is no longer able to carry oxygen, and this lack of oxygen causes the body cells and tissue to fail and die. Carbon monoxide is produced when fuels such as gas, oil, coal, and wood don't burn fully, such as in boilers and gas fires. Carbon monoxide is classified as both an acute and chronic toxin. Short duration exposure to levels of 800 ppm can be fatal. The length of time it takes to recover from carbon monoxide poisoning will depend on how much carbon monoxide you've been exposed to and how long you've been exposed to it. Prolonged, signif- Prolonged significant exposure to carbon monoxide can cause serious complications, including brain damage and heart problems. In very severe cases, it can result in death. Carbon monoxide is classified as highly flammable, acutely toxic gas, toxic to reproduction, and causes damage to organs through prolonged or repeated exposure. 2.6 Specific examples of hazardous substances: isocyanides. Cyanides. Isocyanides are known to be present in rigid or flexible foams, surface coatings, paints, electrical wire insulation, adhesive, rubbers, and fibers. The most commonly used isocyanate compounds are hexamethylene (HDI), methylene diphenyl (MDI), and toluene (TDI). Isocyanates enter the body primarily through inhalation or the skin exposure. For example, polyurethane foam production results from the generation of gas, e.g., carbon dioxide, which can promote the release of cyanates as vapors aerosols. There are several potential health effects, both acute and chronic, associated with exposure to isocyanates. Some examples are: inhalation of isocyanates can cause respiratory irritation sensitization in people or lead to occupational asthma. Skin sensitization can occur due to the irritant nature of isocyanates in contact with the skin surface, which may result in dermatitis. Eye isocyanates are irritants to the eye. Splashes can cause several severe chemical conjunctivitis. 2.7 Specific examples of hazardous substances: metalworking fluids. Metalworking fluids, MWFs, are neat oils or water-based fluids used during the machining and shaping of metals to produce lubrication and cooling. They are sometimes referred to as suds, coolants, slurry, or soap. Exposure to metalworking fluids can cause irritation of the skin, dermatitis, occupational asthma, bronchitis, irritation of the upper respiratory tract, breathing difficulties, or rarely a more serious lung disease called extrinsic allergic alveolitis. Metalworking fluids and dermatitis. A serious health concern associated with metalworking fluids is dermatitis. Every year, around 200 cases of contact dermatitis related to the exposure to cutting oils and coolants are reported to Epiderm, European Prevention Innovative of Initiative for Dermatological Meningitis, mening- meningitis, a scheme in which dermatologists report cases of occupational skin disorders. The figures are undoubtedly a very substantial underestimate of the true incidence of skin disease. There are also thought to be risks to the skin arising from exposure to water mixed wash fluids used to clean machine components. Metalworking fluids and asthma. A growing concern in the risk of asthma, extrinsic allergic affiliolitis, and other breathing problems from exposure to mist from metalworking. Work-related asthma is a significant and growing problem with an estimated of 1,500 to 3,000 new cases each year in the UK. On average, up to 2003, at least 20 of these cases were associated with exposure to metalworking fluids, but it is thought many more cases go unrecognized. There are also thought to be risks of breathing problems arising from exposure to mist from water mixed wash fluids used to clean machine components. There have been several large outbreaks of respiratory illness in the UK where many workers were diagnosed with respiratory illness as a result of exposure to mist. At one of these sites, there was mist from both metalworking and washing machines. Used engine oil. Frequent and prolonged contact with, with used engine oil may cause dermatitis and other skin disorders, including skin cancer. Unnecessary contact with used engine oil should be avoided. Safe systems of work should include the use of protective clothing, which should be cleaned or replaced regularly. Oily rags in pockets should be avoided as the oil will seep through the overalls, etc., and affect the skin below. High standards of personal hygiene and cleanliness should be adopted. Use after-work replenishing creams to replace skin oils. Barrier creams can be useful in helping to wash away contamination from the skin, but they should not be relied upon to act as a full barrier to protect the skin. 2.8 Specific examples of hazardous substances. Silica. Silicosis is a long-term lung disease caused by inhaling large amounts of crystalline silica dust, usually over many years. Silica is a natural substance found in most rocks, sand, and clay, and in products such as bricks and concrete. People in following industries are particular risk: stonemasonry and stone cutting, construction and demolition, pottery, ceramics, and glass manufacturing, mining and quarrying. In the workplace, these materials create dust when they are cut, sanded, carved, etc. Some of the dust may be fine enough to breathe deeply into the lungs and cause harm to health. The fine dust is called respirable crystalline silica (RCS) and is too fine to see with, with normal lighting. Once inside the lungs, the dust particles are attacked by the immune system. This causes inflammation, swelling, and gradually leads to areas of hardened and scarred lung tissue, fibrosis. Lung tissue that's scarred in this way does not function properly. The symptoms of silicosis usually take many years to develop, and you may not notice any problems until after you've stopped working with silica dust. The symptoms can also continue to get worse, even if you're no longer exposed. In most cases, exposure for at least 10 to 20 years is required to cause the condition, although in a few cases it can develop after 5 to 10 years exposure or in rare cases after only a few months of heavy exposure. The main symptoms of silicosis are persistent cough, persistent shortness of breath, and weakness and tiredness. 2.9 Specific examples of hazardous substances. wood dust. In addition to the tiny particles of wood produced during processing, wood dust can also contain bacterial, fungal, and moss spores. The quantity and type of wood dust will depend on the wood being cut and the machine you're using. For example, whether the timber is green or seasoned, whether the hardwood, softwood, or composite board, how aggressive the machine cutter or blade profile is. The biggest risk is from fine dust, as you can breathe this deep into your lungs, where it will do the most damage. Fine dust also spread further from the cutting process, so it is important to clean ledges and other workroom surfaces regularly to prevent dust accumulation. Activities that are likely to produce high dust exposure some over long periods include machine operation, particularly sawing, routing, and turning, sanding by machine and by hand, using compressed air lines to blow the dust off furniture and other articles to be avoided before spraying, and assembly of machined or sanded components. Operations involving processing composite boards, e.g., medium density fiberboard (MDF), the bagging of dust from dust extraction systems, housekeeping, especially if sweeping up and using compressed air lines again to be avoided. Wood is classified into two broad families, hardwood and softwood. The classification of botanical and depends on the fine structure of the cells in the wood species. It does not refer to the physical properties of the wood. For example, balsa wood is hardwood, even though it feels very soft and lightweight. In the UK, both hardwood dust and softwood dust have been assigned workplace exposure limits (WELs) of 5 milligrams per cubic meter, 8-hour time weighted average total inhalable dust. Both are listed as respiratory sensitizers. Hardwood dust are listed as carcinogenic. Health hazards associated with wood dust include skin irritation, which can lead to nettle rash, or irritant dermatitis. Takes up to 15 days to develop. Systems, Symptoms subside when contact with the irritant is removed. Sensitization dermatitis is more problematic and is usually caused by skin exposure to fine wood dust of certain species. This is also referred to as allergic contact dermatitis and results in similar skin effects to those produced by skin irritants. However, once sensitized, the body sets up an allergic reaction and the skin may react severely if subsequently exposed to even very small amounts of wood. Rashes can appear on the skin well away from the original point of contact. The respiratory and allied effects. Wood, especially inhalation of fine dust, can have many effects on the respiratory tract, including rhinitis, a runny nose, violent sneezing, blocked nose, nosebleeds, very rarely nasal cancer, a recognized industrial disease associated with the inhalation of hardwood dust. The most common effects arise from irritation where symptoms usually only persist if the sufferer remains in contact with the irritant. Allergic effects, because of sensitization to wood dust, can also occur and are often very similar to the irritant effects. Lungs. Asthma, impairment of lung function, rarely extrinsic allergic alveolitis, a disease with a flu-like symptoms which can cause progressive lung damage, e.g. when using western red cedar or iroko. Asthma is a particular concern. Wood dust can irritate the respiratory tract, provoking asthma attacks in sufferers. Although effective controls of dust levels normally improves the problem. Other health issues from wood dust include eye soreness, watering, and conjunctivitis. 2.10 Specific examples of hazardous substances. Asbestos. Asbestos is a chronic, long term Lung condition caused by prolonged exposure to asbestos. Asbestos is general name given to several naturally occurring fibrous minerals that have crystallized to form long thin fibers. They are divided into two subgroups: serpentine, crystalline, chrys- chrysotile, white asbestos, which was the most commonly used type of asbestos, and amphiboles, which includes crocidolite, blue asbestos, amosite, brown asbestos, tremolite, astisonolite, and antopholite, of which crocidolite was the most commonly used. Blue and brown asbestos are considered to be the most dangerous. The important the importation, supply, and use of blue and brown asbestos have been banned in the UK since 1985, and this ban was extended to include white asbestos in 1999. Chrysolite asbestos fibers are soft, flexible, and curved, whereas amphibole asbestos fibers are brittle and often are wrought or needle-like in appearance. In the past, asbestos was widely used in construction. Asbestos can be very dangerous. It does not present a health risk if it's undisturbed, but if the material containing asbestos is chipped, drilled, broken, or allowed to deteriorate, it can release a fine dust that contains asbestos fibers. When the dust is breathed in, the asbestos fibers enter the lungs and can gradually damage them over time. For asbestosis to develop, prolonged exposure to relatively high numbers of fibers is necessary. However, it is not the only factor, as many people avoided getting asbestosis despite heavy exposure. Breathing in asbestos fibers may eventually scar the lungs of some people, which can lead to several symptoms, including shortness of breath. This may only occur after physical activity at first, but it can eventually become a more constant problem. A persistent cough, wheezing, fatigue, extreme tiredness, chest pain. In more advanced cases, clubbed, swollen fingertips. The outlook of asbestosis can vary significantly depending on the level and length of exposure, the extent of damage to the lungs, and whether any other conditions are present. Asbestosis can get worse over time, and severe cases can place a significant strain on a person's health and shorten their life expectancy. But in many cases, the condition progresses very slowly or not at all. However, people with asbestosis have a higher risk of developing other serious and potentially life-threatening conditions such as pleural disease, where the membrane covering the lungs, pleura, becomes thicker, which can further contribute to breathlessness and chest discomfort. Mesothelioma, a type of cancer that affects the membrane that covers the lungs, heart, and gut. Lung cancer. 2.11. Specific examples of hazardous substances: lead and its compounds. Lead is soft, blue-gray metal. It is found at low concentrations in the Earth's crust, predominantly as lead sulfide galena. But the widespread occurrence of lead in the environment is largely the result of anthropogenic human activity. The utility of lead and lead compounds were discovered in prehistoric times. Lead has been used in plumbing and tableware since the time the Roman Empire. Lead usage increases progressively, and industrialization and rose dramatically with the widespread use of the automobile in the 20th century. Lead has found major uses in pipes and plumbing, pigments and paints, gasoline, additives, construction materials, and lead-acid batteries. The uses of lead in pipes, paints, and gasoline additives have resulted in substantial introductions of lead into the environment and human exposure, and are being phased out in many countries. The predominant use of lead is now in lead acid batteries and is to a lesser extent in construction materials and lead-based chemicals. Inorganic lead. Lead exists in both organic and inorganic forms. Inorganic lead. The most important routes of absorption of inorganic lead are ingestion via gastrointestinal tract, often because of poor hygiene, not washing hands before eating and drinking after handling lead, and inhalation of dust, fumes, or vapors into the lungs. The effects are cumulative. Lead is not easily excreted from the body. If lead levels get too high, it can cause symptoms such as dizziness, tiredness, cramps, headaches, even anemia. Continuous uncontrolled exposure can cause more serious symptoms such as kidney damage, nerve and brain damage, infertility. Organic lead. Organic lead compounds such as tetraethyl and tetramethyl lead appreciably declined with the demise of leaded petrol. As of June 2016, only Algeria, Yemen, and Iraq continued widespread use of leaded gasoline. Potential higher exposure concerned activities involving the blending of the lead into gasoline and in the cleaning out of leaded gasoline storage tanks. Organic lead can enter the body through inhalation or ingestion. It is also readily absorbed through the skin. Acute exposure to high levels over acute exposure to a high level over can cause intoxication, as can lower exposure over a longer period of time. Milder effects include tiredness, wild dreams, anxiety, trembling, and loss of appetite. More severe intoxication causes episodes of disorientation, hallucination, and intense activity, which may require an individual to be restrained. The episodes may convert in convulsive seizures, which may end in unconsciousness or death. 2.12. Developing internationally accepted reviews of effects of hazardous substances. Concise International Chemical Assessment Documents (CICADs) are short documents that provide summaries of scientific information available on the potential effects of chemicals upon human health and the environment. These documents are based on selected national or regional evaluation or on existing WHO ILO International Program on Chemical Safety IPCS Environmental Health Criteria Documents EHC. Before acceptance for publication, the CICAD by IPCS, the draft documents are subjected to extensive peer review by internationally selected experts to ensure their completeness, accuracy in how the original data are represented, and the validity of the conclusions drawn. Unless otherwise stated, CICADs are based on a search of the scientific literature to the date shown in the Executive Summary International Chemical Safety Cards on the relevant chemicals are attached at the end of the CICAD to provide the reader with essential summary information on the protection human health and on emergency actions. The ICSCs are produced by a separate peer-reviewed procedure. The primary objective of the CICADs is to characterize hazards and dose response relationship associated with exposure to a chosen priority chemical. CICADs are not a summary of all available data but include only the information considered critical for characterization of risk. Critical studies are described in sufficient detail to indicate how they support the conclusions drawn. Risk to human health and the environment vary depending upon the type of and extent of the exposure. Users of the CICADs are encouraged to characterize risk on the basis of appropriate locally measured or predis- predicted exposure scenarios. The first draft undergoes primary reviews of the IPCS and one or more experienced authors of the criteria documents to ensure that it meets the specific criteria of the CICADs. The draft is then sent for international peer review by scientists known for their relevant expertise and by scientists selected from an international roster compiled by the IPCS through recommendations from the IPCS national contact points and from the IPCS participating institutions. The CICAD Final Review Board ensures that each CICAD has been subjected to an appropriate thorough peer review, verifies that the peer reviewer's comments have been addressed, appropriately provides guidance on how to resolve remaining issues if, in opinion of the board, the author has not adequately addressed all comments of the reviewers, and approves the CICADs for publication as trustworthy international assessments. Board members serve in their personal capacity not as representative of any organization, government, or industry. They are selected because of their expertise in human and environmental toxicology or because of their experience in the regulation of chemicals and with regard to the need or for balanced geographic representation. But but what information can you expect to find in a CICAD? The first section is an executive summary, followed by detail relating to the identity of physical chemical properties of the substance considered and analytical methods used for monitoring. Then there are reviews of research of sources of human and environmental exposure, of possibilities for environmental transport distribution and transformation, and of the current status of the environmental and human exposures. Next to the evidence linking exposure dose to effect and to population response in laboratory animals and in humans is described and assessed, including that from in vitro test tube culture dish studies and from studies of toxitokinetics, how the body handles toxins, and fundamental metabolic process, cause case studies, and epidemi- epidemiological investigations are also considered. In addition, any information on effects of other organisms in the laboratory and in the field is collected, and finally, an effect evaluation is carried out. The evaluation may lead to suggested criteria for setting tolerable exposure limits or guidance values and suggestions for further research to clarify points of importance. A final section summarizes previous evaluations by international bodies. There is then a list of the references used in preparing the document, followed by appendices describing the main source document and listing the members of the peer review group and of the final review board. CICADs are extremely valuable sources information for anyone concerned with any aspect of chemical safety. They can be a first reference resource for valid independently assessed information against which to judge the often poorly founded assertions made by those who have vested interest in exaggerating risk or in playing them down.